And so today we're going to be covering a bit of a broader topic area. We're going to be covering the income insecurity. So kind of that intersection almost of housing and income and how secure you feel. I'm sure we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's constantly referred to, you know, that idea that if you don't have basic food and shelter and safety, you're not going to be able to think about job and family and moving forward, all the way to the point that, has anybody reached self-actualization yet? Just checking here. Has anybody kind of got there yet? All right. So tonight we are really very fortunate in Washtenaw County, and in particular in Western Washtenaw County, to have really such an esteemed panel of leaders. So we are going to, on this evening, start with Bob Pierce, who is the former director of the Chelsea Chamber of Commerce. We have Trin. Yep. So there's our, then we got our cheering section in the back with Fran. We have Trin Pfeiffer, who is the director of the Chelsea Senior Center. We have Doug Smith, who is with Faith in Action, along with Nancy Paul, who is the director of the Faith in Action. We have, and I'm going to mess up your last name. Seyfried. We have Laura Seyfried, who is the director of the Manchester Senior Center. Community Center, excuse me. And then we have Jane Pacheco, who is with the ICPJ, the Interfaith Council on Peace and Justice, and also is a sitting Chelsea City Council member for 4 years. 4 years? Yep. 4 years, just re-elected. So with this panel, we want to take a moment to let everybody introduce themselves. Okay, so just, you know, one or 2 minutes kind of who you are and your role in the community, and maybe a thought on this topic.
Thank you. As Donna said, I'm Bob Pierce. I am the former, recently retired, director of the Chelsea Chamber for 14 and a half years, and a small business owner for a number of years in Chelsea. So I have a background primarily in the business end, both as an advocate and as a owner. So in really reviewing what we're going to talk about tonight, this is a topic that is near and dear, I think, to all of our hearts, and especially with the stock market doing so well, and a number of people getting very wealthy and even more wealthy than they were a year ago, and we see that stagnation at so many levels at our employment, and especially in the world that my wife and I work in regularly with the disabled population. So this is a topic that I think touches all of us, and there's a great need, and thanks for asking me.
All right, thanks for having me here today. I'm here to represent the Chelsea Senior Center. My name is Trin Pfeiffer. I've been director of the Senior Center for almost 7 years now. It's gone by very quickly. The Senior Center's mission is to enhance the quality of life and well-being of local seniors and their families. So right now we have over 1,000 active members who come to the Senior Center on a daily basis to participate in different programs that promote healthy aging. But beyond our physical walls, we also support several hundred seniors who are probably some of the most vulnerable seniors in our community. And to those seniors, we deliver Meals on Wheels, and we also advocate for resources when they're needed, when a crisis comes up. So if you can imagine a senior who lives in a rural area, because we do support seniors not just in Chelsea, but in the surrounding communities. You're on a fixed income, you're isolated, you can't drive anymore, and then you have a crisis come up. So now you're unable to afford not just your regular bills that you had budgeted for, but now emergency things that you cannot afford, like a handicap ramp. So we work very closely with local community partners like Faith in Action, Manchester CRC, Catholic Social Services, Jewish Family Services, to really try to advocate for those resources so that those seniors can stay in their own homes. When surveyed, we know that over 95% of seniors want to stay in their own homes, want to age independently and to be able to live in the homes that they've had for many years. And so when that choice becomes jeopardized because of income and uncertainty and insecurity, you know, we really try to step in and help advocate for those resources. So thanks for having me here tonight.
I'm Doug Smith, social worker at Faith in Action. That's not good. Good. Turn it off. So I'm the social worker at Faith in Action, and I also am the volunteer coordinator, so I recruit and train and supervise about 50 volunteers a week. We need about 50 volunteers a week to make Faith in Action go, and primarily working in our food pantry and clothing room. But I also see the clients as well, and address everything from evictions and utility shutoffs to food insecurity, mental health issues. We're seeing a real change in the population, much more challenging and complex clients that we're seeing right now. And I think it's going to be even more so because we just entered into a collaboration with Avalon Housing, and they purchased a building right across the street from Jet's Pizza. It's a 17-unit building, and they're in the process of renovating it right now. And once it's all done, all the units in the building will be, they'll all have vouchers, and so the rent will be dependent on their income, because most of our clients pay over 50% of their income for housing. Anyway, we're going to provide supportive services over there, and at least a third of the folks are going to be, formerly homeless folks with mental illnesses and substance abuse issues, and so it's going to be a big challenge for us, but I'm looking forward to it.
I would just like to add that I think we're at a really critical juncture in terms of really getting the need to sort of get political about the fact that the cost of living is going up in this part of the universe pretty rapidly, at the same time that wages are completely stagnant. We've just started recertifying all of our clients in the new year, and every single person that is recertified has had the exact same income or less, and their living expenses have gone up. And that's really unsustainable.
You didn't say who
Oh, I'm Nancy Paul, I'm sorry. I'm the director of Faith in Action. We're kind of a staff of 2-point-something, and so we cover for each other and do a lot, but anyway, we're kind of a team.
Thank you. I am Laura Seyfried. I'm the director at the Community Resource Center in Manchester. And like Faith in Action, we're a safety net services agency. We help the low-income folks in the village of Manchester and the 4 surrounding townships, which is roughly the Manchester School District. Access benefits, access services that they need. And one of the things that we see often is folks who come to Manchester because they feel like it's more affordable. But they get there and they find out that there's no public transportation in Manchester. There's one small grocery store. There's no health clinic. There is a private doctor's office, but no health clinic, no place to go other than Chelsea for an urgent care or an ER visit, which we know is where most people end up. Our agency is a staff of 1.5. I have an administrative assistant who works half-time. We rely on a lot of volunteers to help us. We operate a food pantry that's open 5 days a week. That's Monday through Friday, not on the weekends or in the evenings. We also partner with other agencies across the county. Faith in Action is one. They have a clothing room. We don't have access to that in Manchester, so we can refer our clients who need that service to go to Faith in Action. And every week I hear somebody say how happy they are that they've been able to utilize those services and that they don't get asked another round of questions as to why they're there. They're just allowed to go in and use the service. So we appreciate that. But even further, we partner with St. Joe's Chelsea to bring a behavioral health navigator to Manchester once a week. We don't have a caseworker or social worker like Doug at our office. Manchester doesn't have anybody like that. So folks who come to Manchester have no way to get other places, need that service provided there. So our partnership with St. Joe's really helps in that respect. We've also got someone from St. Joe's who comes down and meets with older adults by appointment and helps them with their Medicare and or Medicaid issues. They will also help if they have past due hospital bills. These are resources that people at home or in small communities anywhere, they don't even know where to start. They get something in the mail, they don't even know if it's real. So we feel like our role is to provide those safety net services. We make sure people have food. We want to make sure they're in a safe living environment. And it may not be truly affordable, but they make it work. And then we want to make sure that they have access to things that are available to everyone else in the county.
Hello, I am Jane Pacheco, and like Donna said, I have multiple hats. My day job is with a social justice advocacy group out of Ann Arbor called ICPJ, Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, in the Chelsea and Western Washtenaw area. We're better known under Chelsea Action moniker. That's a group of local social justice group organizations that kind of have banded together under a different name. It's a 50-year-old social justice organization that, unlike the rest of these guys up here, does not do direct service. We work with direct service providers, but our mission has been from the beginning to really look at the root cause of some of the social justice issues and do deep exploration, education. We then go out and inspire and sort of mobilize action throughout Washtenaw County in terms of changing behavior and ultimately changing policy. So a lot of times social service organizations, they're working on feeding the hungry, they're working on housing the homeless, and don't have time to do the advocacy work that it takes to change people's hearts and minds and behaviors and laws and institutions. So that is our task, and in that role, as well as my role on Chelsea City Council, I hear a lot about challenges and needs in our community and the community of Western Washtenaw County, Greater Washtenaw County, and how intersectional it is. Obviously, we do racial and economic justice work, touches on transit issues, housing issues, food access issues. All of these things are related. As it relates to the decision makers, Donna can tell you we have a little bit of influence, but to move the needle, it's a multi-pronged approach.
So I hope you can see how impressive this panel is and how fortunate we are to have you all in our community. So now we're going to start with questions. So I have 5 or 6 here. I'm just going to kick it off with 1 or 2, but as soon as you have a question, please raise your hand and we'll ask it of the panel. So these questions, all of you don't have to respond to it. If everybody responds to every single one, we'll get through 3. So if you have something to add to the conversation, if you'd like to kick it off, and then the next person, if you have something to add, if not, we'll move on to the next question. So one of the things that almost every single one of you mentioned was stagnating wages, good paying jobs. In Western Washtenaw County, what are some of the barriers that you see for people in finding that good paying, stable job that offers a living wage? What are the barriers to achieving that type of employment?
There's a mic on the table.
Yes, there's a mic on the table. Does anybody want to try and throw out a barrier that you see in folks getting good paying, stable jobs? All right, because if nobody took it, I was just going to hand it to you, Bob. So glad you raised your hand.
There any number of barriers, right? But the good paying jobs, there are a couple things we need. First of all, we need an employer. Our employers in Western Washtenaw County are, we don't have the Ford, we don't have General Motors, but we have some good industrial employers out there. In my experience over the last 14 years, the thing that we heard was we do have those jobs, but we don't have trained employees. So we've got a combination of how do we better train our workforce, and we have to find that good employer who has good stable employment and can provide a wage that is above the minimum wage. And I think someone, I think it was you, Doug, mentioned this is a barrier throughout the Western Washtenaw, the rural area, and Laura, you mentioned it, and it's transportation. Transportation is the key.
I'm just going to add a little bit to that as well about employers. I think that in Western Washtenaw County, there's also a lack of diversity of employers. So just speaking from a parent of a recent college grad in her job search, she did land a job, but it was on the west side of the state, so it was very difficult to find a job in this area just because of the lack of diversity. While we do have employers, there's not enough diversity to cover a certain specialty or an area, or the recent college grads that are coming out that are looking for a decent paying job. So I think that that's the economic stimulus that people keep talking about. You know, that's something that we need to keep working on to achieve that for a more rural area.
Just as an observation, yeah, because I need this. An observation as an employer in Western Washtenaw County. One of the things that I find challenging is not just the diversity, not just the transportation, but the lack of education. I think we do not do enough in educating our students. We don't put enough emphasis as a country on education. And so finding well-educated people to hire can be very difficult. And I think that in Western Washtenaw County, as Bob was saying, the employers, but also diversity of employers, we've got a lot of service industry jobs. They're not generally high paying. They don't require a lot of skill. And so they don't pay as much. And so not having transportation or not having affordable housing where your job is becomes difficult for people to make a good living in those kinds of jobs. If I can't pay a lot as an employer and somebody can't afford to live in downtown Chelsea and can't get the transportation necessary to get there, it becomes this vicious cycle. And one thing that I think that we all tend to not think really clearly about is buying local. If you're not supporting your local businesses, they can't support the jobs for local applicants. So keep that in mind.
Thank you. So do you think people, I'm just tossing this back on the idea of diversity and employment, you know, when we look at that and keeping young college grads at home, do you think that's a role that Western Washtenaw can play? Or do you think the role Western Washtenaw wants to play is more of a great place to live or a great place to live and work?
You set me up. So I said, hey, give me that mic. As we discussed at the housing forum on Sunday, and Jennifer mentioned, it's sort of cyclical, right? It's a cycle that, Bob mentioned the employers. I was having a discussion at a business lunch in Chelsea on Monday. There was a real estate broker there from the Ann Arbor area, and we were talking about how to attract medical, engineering, tech. How do we get people to take down big pieces of property or build buildings or employ large numbers of people in Western Washtenaw? And the broker stated, and I'm sure Bob knows this well, and this is, it's a multi-layered issue, right? Because it is about quality of life, but it's about transportation, it's about housing, it's about, he mentioned that in order to get your young people to move here for a job, the job has to be here. In order for the job to be here, you need to offer all of these things. And all of those things cost a lot of money to do in terms of infrastructure. So from my perspective on the Chelsea City Council board, we're talking about 20 years out, 30 years out, how do we plan for a city that is going to be viable, not just maintain the character and personality and all the things that we love about Western Washtenaw County, but also look toward the future so that we are growing with it and including plans for employers and employees and people of all ages and all types of transit and et cetera, et cetera. So.
Anybody else? Okay, so the next question, this one, what impact do you believe, and these questions were put together by the Western Washtenaw Dem Board, just so you know the questions I'm working off of here. What impact do you believe an increase in minimum wage to $15 would have both on individuals and the economy? So $15 an hour, would that make a difference to the folks that you're recertifying?
Well, it certainly would, you know.
What is the typical wage that you're recertifying folks at this year?
A really typical wage is a $9 or $10 an hour job. You know, I mean, it's very typical for us to see people who are bringing in, anywhere from, $1,000 to $1,500 a month, and then trying to pay, at a bare minimum, $800 or $900 a month in rent, and then all of life expenses on top of that. So, I mean, I don't know what your what the take home ends up being at a $15 an hour job, but it certainly at least takes off a little bit of heat. Whether that's viable, when and if that's ever going to happen it feels like a bit of a dream. We're certainly not talking a middle class life even at $15 an hour for a household for more than 2 people.
One of the things that we've seen over the last several years is that, and the school social workers in Dexter have really backed this up, is that they've seen a real decrease in the amount of kids that are getting free and reduced lunches. And the reason why that is because they've been forced out of the area. They just can't afford to live there. And
We've seen that happen, I believe, at Walkabout Creek.
yeah,
Where
right.
there was a change
yeah.
in housing status there. We've seen a lot
That's
of
kind of what I'm
families.
talking about. Yeah, we had a lot of people 12 years ago. We had maybe 20 families that we were working with in there now, maybe 3 or 4. But yeah, and so they've been forced out, and they went to like Sile Farms, which I think people have a real wrong idea that these mobile home complexes like Sile Farms or Sylvan Crossing and are affordable. They're not affordable at all. I mean, the lot rent and the rent for the places, most of our people can't afford to. So it kind of goes to what they were talking about on Saturday. I think $15 an hour might have prevented, several of our families having to move out of Dexter.
Okay. Bob, from an employer perspective, or handing it right there. I'm sorry, Laura.
So obviously we work with the really low income families, just like Nancy and Doug do, and an increase to $15 an hour from the minimum wage, which is what a lot of folks that we work with would obviously make a positive impact in their life. One of the things that we also encounter quite often, more often than I even feel like comfortable admitting, is that even today we had a family come in who didn't have money to buy food, yet their annual income is over $50,000. But they're a young family. They have debt, not just housing debt, but they've been, now they've ended up, probably, certainly they take responsibility for it, but they found themselves in this situation where they have a really high mortgage payment and they can't refinance because maybe they don't have good credit, and they've got credit card debt, and they've got student loan debt. And I think that, we talk about raising the minimum wage, and yes, that helps one population of people, but these young people that we hear all the time about the student loan debt, we have to keep that in mind too, that it's not just about your base salary, it's about this whole combination. And, and we can't say that it's not, they can't have a house or they can't have a family. So I think there's so many other layers to it.
All right, Bob, so from the employer perspective, perhaps, $15 an hour minimum wage?
This has been played, I think, all over America. And the comments that are almost boilerplate from an employer, and it comes, I think, based in fear running their business, is that we can't afford that. We just can't afford that. I think if you're a mom and pop, if you have 10 or less employees, you really have to struggle with that. I think that's real. If you're Walmart, I don't think it makes a damn bit of difference,
Right, I would agree.
frankly. So, you know, I'm a big fan of let's watch what's going on in Washington State. New York State's recently raising their income, or their minimum wage, and let's see how it plays out. Because, like with every other major change like this, there's a lot of fear that's manifest in that decision. So an employer will first worry about him or herself in their business, and they should. But as a society, we have to start asking a couple other questions, I think. And I'd like to broaden this just a bit, and I think Laura mentioned, I don't know what $15 an hour would work. I did some math. A $15 an hour, 40-hour a week, 52-week a year job would yield you max about $31,000 a year. Okay, that's 31K. In Michigan, the latest numbers I could find, and my wife hears this all the time, I hate averages. Averages is the most misused, misunderstood statistic, but that's the best I could come up with. So the average starting salary of a teacher, well, it's 0 to 2 years in the state of Michigan, numbers through 2016, was $36,620. So what we're saying is our teachers cannot afford to, our starting teachers can't afford to live in our communities. These are educated people with great earning potential, agreed. But how about these entry-level folks that at $15 an hour, if they're lucky to get that, that's as far as they're going to go. When Walmart, one of my favorite companies in the world, so 2016 statistics showed that the president CEO of Walmart made 1,100 times the hourly rate of their average hourly worker. So to kind of expand this to all of the wonderful things we all feel and believe, I think therein lies one of the key issues in this. The people that are bringing home another number, Tim Cook at Apple, his total compensation package is $150 million annually. I think they can share some of that money with the rest of us. And it's not trickle down, it better be pouring down, because if we can minimum wage this thing at $15 or $20 an hour, we're still not going to have the buying power for income security that we really need.
All right, well, thank you. I think looking at Washington State is a really kind of critical portion of this. You can almost look at it as the pilot project for the nation. And I know with the $15 an hour, there's been real positive sides to it. There's been real, some difficulties there with that coming across. And so we'll see how that settles out. I know when I was talking about this issue at the last Chelsea Chamber breakfast, which was held in a local business in Chelsea, it was the local business owner who had 8 to 10 employees, who was in a service industry, who it made very anxious about how they were going to do that. But every time we talk about trying to slice the pie one way or differently, okay, if you're under 18, then it is a different, it just comes down to if you're doing the same work, you should earn the same pay, and that's how we've gotten into a lot of the trouble places that we are.
2 cents.
Oh, sure.
Again, as an employer, one of the things that I don't understand, why more people don't understand, is let's take the community of Chelsea, where I have a business. If we're paying our employees a little more, they have more to spend in the community. And the more they can spend in the community, the more I can afford to pay in the community. And it's a great cycle that can and should work. But it only works if we're all doing it. So if one employer in the area is paying a higher wage, it's not really doing enough for the entire community. And I think that, so doing something like a higher minimum wage across the board could increase our economic capabilities in this state and really lift everybody up and make it so that the smaller employers can afford to pay more, because they would be having more business come in because people are spending more money.
Thank you very much. And that was Henry Ford's proposition, to get a car in every garage. Okay, so the next one is, are there services that people in more rural areas need that people in more urban areas might not? I know I have a whole list, but when we're thinking about kind of that rural urban, and sometimes it takes a minute to like kind of think about what it means to be when we're talking about the rural area of Western Washtenaw County. If you're just to think about it, I think about it, of course, in House districts. So the 52nd House District is 14 of the 20 townships in our county. So those in the 14 townships that I represent are 90,000 people. In the other 6 township geographic area, there's 3 representatives. There's approximately 270,000 people. So in the western half of Washtenaw County, we live a little bit differently than 270,000 people put in 6 township area versus 90,000 people spread out over 14 townships. So what are some of the services in more rural areas that you find that are lacking for folks that we need to focus on and make sure are available? So we'll go with Trin. Okay, that's Laura.
So I think one of the things that people misunderstand also is that seniors are either afraid of technology or don't know how to use it. But one of the biggest barriers we have in a rural area is just the sheer lack of infrastructure for technology. We personally live in Lima Township and do not have access to any kind of high-speed internet. We have to piece together a couple of different services and pay a good fortune for it to get pretty slow internet connection. But we have to have it to be able to do our work so our kids can get access to school and things that they need. And I find that with seniors, this gap becomes harder and harder, this technology gap. So as telemedicine, talking to and communicating with your physician via the portals, applying for benefits, state benefits, it has to be all done online. So these technology gaps are hurting our rural seniors far more than seniors in an urban area, just because delivering services to them or trying to be able to come into their home to help them is also, it's a hard endeavor because now they're spread out in a rural area with dirt roads. We're just trying to deliver meals to them on a winter day on a dirt road is a challenge. So the infrastructure of technology, of roads, the isolation that our residents in rural areas face is a real challenge for service delivery.
Yeah, so I would agree with what Trin just said, because infrastructure, especially for internet access, is a huge problem in the Manchester area. If you live in Freedom Township, there's areas where there's no cell phone service, let alone high-speed internet. And, not just for seniors, but also for the families with kids too. For those of you who have small children still in the school system, you know that now, instead of getting your messages, from the teacher calling you, you get an email or a text. Well, if you live in an area where you don't have cell service, how do you get that message that there's a snow day, right? So that is a huge issue. And then, my thing in Manchester is there's no public transportation. We don't have a wave bus. And the issue is that there is a small senior citizens group in Manchester, and they have a bus, and my understanding is they hold the rights for the zip code to have the public transportation, but they only serve seniors and disabled adults. And they don't operate every single day, and it's kind of up to the bus driver to decide whether you get a ride or not, and it's not free. So it's everything about that system is not right, but yet they're able to work with that, and that's how it's set up at, I guess, multiple levels at the state and federal level. And we get calls all the time from people who need rides. So we spend time, well, if you have Medicaid, maybe you can get the Medicaid taxi to come and get you to take you to that medical appointment. If you just need to go shopping, there's no options there unless you have a friend or a neighbor who's willing to do that for you. And it really puts a lot of struggle on our agency in that people, they want to have their own transportation, but they can't afford to have their own car. We know people that have left the area because of that they can't, they need to be able to access services. They can't drive anymore, or they just can't afford to have their own vehicle. So those are like my top two things: lack of internet, lack of public transportation. And I think the other thing is like the social isolation, and it's just kind of this general access. Like people in Manchester, I live in Chelsea and I work in Manchester. I've lived in Chelsea for 30 years. There's a lot of folks in Manchester who think like Chelsea is just like a little Ann Arbor. Like they don't even want to go there because it's like, ooh, scary.
Big city.
They wouldn't dream of driving on the freeway. I mean, there's a lot of people that still will not drive on the freeway. And so those kind of things, it's just like, it's a very different lifestyle. So I think this just whole access thing too is very challenging.
Thank you. Anyone else? Or Nancy?
I was just going to say there's just a complete sort of catch-22 when you can't get a job because you can't get there.
Yeah.
And you can't get a car because you don't have a job. And, you know, there's a lot of properties out in the country in places where people end up that do not have resources. You know, they're doubled and tripled and they're basemented and couch surfing. And people end up in these really isolated places and they are essentially just dead in the water. There's nothing happening for these people. You know, and again, like say no internet, no car, no anything. I mean, they might as well be in, you know, one of Trump's S-word places. You know, in terms of really, you know, they might as well be way, way further. You know, I mean, at least in an urban area, you know, you can get somewhere for a few hours of work somewhere. And that's really, I mean, we just know lots of people who are completely isolated. I mean, you mean young people?
Yes.
You know, young, unskilled people. And then you skate from one, you know, $9 an hour job to another. You go from Wendy's to McDonald's to, you know, maybe a gig at Polly's for a while. And you just go from one low wage job to the next, but then of course you lose that job because you can't get there, and 2 or 3 times of not showing up you get fired from that job, and then you just skate to the next one. And
So Jeff, do you have a final comment on this?
Yeah, and also the other thing is that all the services that our people need are all in the eastern part of the county, and so when you don't have reliable transportation, you can't get there. I guess something happened tonight that I just kind of like want to throw out, is that I think that people live in rural areas don't get the kind of police response and coverage that maybe someone living in Chelsea would. There's a young woman that came into my office tonight, and she told me that her landlord basically changed the locks on the door, and she can't get in. All of her stuff is inside, and she can't get in. And she can't get a police officer to go out there with her. And so, when I called some police, and it just seems like they kind of make up the rules as they go along. Because back in Detroit, where I was a tenant organizer, if a landlord did that, that is considered a lockout, and they could be sued, and you know the police would be all over them. So.
Well, I think you have someone here who might be able to answer a question for you at the end about how to get that done quickly. So, audience, do we have any questions for the panelists? Kathy.
Actually, it's interesting for me to listen to what you're talking about. I'm sorry. I found it really interesting listening to your specifics, but also thinking about it in terms of themes. Because the things that I hear, the challenges, the root causes, are something that I hear all the time, and it is true on the east side of the county. And it's unfortunate that people don't talk to each other more on a county-wide level about issues of poverty and access. Because I get calls all the time. I know a lot of folks that work at the sheriff's office. Our sheriff takes a very root cause approach and quality of life approach to public safety. So, and one of the things that I hear all the time on the east side of the county and throughout even places in Ann Arbor and certainly the west side of the county, transportation. Another thing that I hear a lot is isolation. When we talk, when people talk about the east side of the county, there's this conception of it being all urban, and that isn't entirely accurate. In Washtenaw County, on the east side, there are isolated pockets of poverty. Even though it's different in terms of specifics, the theme is still there. When you talk, say, MacArthur Boulevard, which not everybody is probably familiar with, well, some people are, which is a good thing. It's out in the middle of Superior Township, concentrated, generational, segregated poverty, multiple Section 8 units, when you start talking about no grocery store, no support activities, I said, wait now, are they talking about Manchester or MacArthur? Very similar things, very similar themes. The only thing out in MacArthur is a tiny little library about the size of my office at work and be on the front of a fire station. No, not even a community resource center around MacArthur. These themes that you're talking about, the reasons for the transportation, the education, the going from one low-wage job and then having transportation difficulties and then losing the job and having to go to another and not having the education to do any better, not couch surfing, not having access to housing that one can afford. I hear that from across the county. The themes are the same, and that's something, I think it's unfortunate that people on the western side of the county who are struggling to help folks who are in poverty, that are trying to make a difference, that somehow this needs to be a county-wide discussion, emphasizing themes, but specifics to, there's specifics to each of the neighborhoods where poverty is concentrated across the county. But it just struck me, if I didn't know which part of the county you were talking about, and I looked at the root cause and the themes, they're all the same. We have so much in common, whether it's the west side of the county or the east side of the county. The issues that are there to make our lives better for those who need it most, who are most vulnerable, they're the same. And I thank Donna for some of the things she's doing in as much as she can do in Lansing to round those issues. So, but I just thought I'd share that little light bulb. Wow, it's all the same.
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you. So we're going to kind of close it up now with a wish list. So if you had a wish list for help from your community, from local government, from state, from federal government, you might even have a gubernatorial candidate in the room who is listening. You might have congressional candidate and representatives in the room, state representatives, local community leaders. What would be kind of your wish list that you would like focusing on income inequality? So we'll start with Laura, and then we'll just kind of rotate it around.
Well, one thing at the state level would be, I don't know if many of you are familiar with a program called My Bridges, MI Bridges. That's the public access point for folks to get food assistance, Medicaid, that sort of thing. I attended a training last week where they're rolling out the new MI Bridges. And the new MI Bridges puts more of the labor part of the applying for benefits on the small community agencies that are actually working directly with the clients who are applying for these benefits. But we're not getting any support from the state other than a single training to do that. And so, it's the old story. I mean, you've all heard it before that, we're doing the work the best we can. I'm 1.5 people, Doug and Nancy are 2.5 people, and serving a big number of folks. And yet there's still a lot of staff at the county office doing their work too, and they're working hard. But it just sometimes feels like, you know, the more that can get shifted to these small community agencies who are not necessarily government funded, it just keeps happening. So that's a struggle. And how do you manage that?
So what would you think, what would be on your wish list to fix that?
Some additional funding to go along with that additional responsibility, which would be, you know, challenging, right? Okay.
Yeah, there's definitely has become kind of an unfunded mandate as a lot of these responsibilities for public programs are getting shifted onto the private sector. And at the same time that that's happening, you know, we're getting tax law changes that are going to prevent people from supporting these small nonprofits in these small local communities, and we're the safety net. So we're in a community like Chelsea and Dexter, which is fairly well resourced, and I'm raising funds in that small community for the safety net. Well, the people who need the safety net are shrinking because they're being forced out of our community and being forced into more and more isolated pockets and of areas where there's less ability to create a safety net for them. So the safety net organizations like us, you know, have this like inverse ability, you know, to be able to raise funds to support, you know, the people who need help. And I think what's going to happen over time is that the people who are poor are going to get poorer. And I think we're really you know, we're going to see a lot more poverty. I think we're going to see more extreme poverty if we don't see some change in supports for the safety net.
Excellent, thank you. Next.
I'm going to echo the themes of funding, but specifically for seniors, I would ask that we continue to advocate to preserve funding from the Older Americans Act at the federal level, to preserve state funding that supports our area agencies on aging that determine how senior services are distributed and allocated at the state level, and then at our city and township level to continue to preserve the funding that protects and provides for our services that we deliver to our seniors, because as these income issues come up, as tax laws change and healthcare laws change, you know, if you're on a fixed income, if those things change, it changes the dynamics for a senior and their ability to live with any dignity. So funding, and then also just greater awareness and advocacy. Because I do want to address what you had said about those issues resonating on the east side of the county, and we don't disagree with that. I think there are certainly pockets throughout the county that share similar themes, but we've all been in a room with funding agencies that echo over and over again that all the funding in Washtenaw County should be earmarked for specific zip codes, and those are all on the east side of the county. So we often feel from the county level there's not enough recognition that there's a need out here in Western Washtenaw County. So I think you can echo that. We've all sat in grant funding meetings from the county and from different entities that are county-wide, and there's often perception that Chelsea and the western side of the county are you know, it's like in Ann Arbor. They're wealthy U of M retirees, and so they don't really need as many services as the east side of the county does. And so we're constantly having to champion that. So that's just a response to what we're trying to share here.
Jay, you
Yeah.
know, because yours is going to be long. So
No,
we'll
no,
go to the wish list before Jay
it's
gets going?
it's fairly short,
All right.
and it's related but different. My wish, and I don't know, this is truly a wish, so I'll take all suggestions, is to have, how do we have a more regional conversation? And I mean, that is Chelsea, Lima, Linden, Sylvan, Dexter Township, that's Manchester, Freedom, Sharon, that's east side, west side of the county. What I'm learning is, you know, these are big, complicated issues that intersect our nation, let alone our county. And we are really in these little lawmaking silos that are worried about crazy little things like, oh, so-and-so didn't return my call 12 years ago and I'm mad at that guy. And it's not productive. There aren't avenues in place. There's not, everything seems to be exploring and making it up anew. And I know that isn't necessarily the case, because I see Pam Burns there, and I know that years ago there was some sort of Western Washtenaw Regional Planning Organization that doesn't exist anymore. And I know there was some sort of countywide planning group that talked about roads and houses and bike paths and transit. And so that would be my wish list. So whoever can make that happen.
Good. Well, thank you very much. So a big round of applause for our panelists. Oh, please, oh, Bob. We now
How much
have
time
an
do
encore
I have?
presentation.
2 minutes? Oh,
We'll have to
no.
light our lighters for you when you're done.
No, I've been asked to represent the business community. So I'm going to say this. There's not a lot of wish list in the government world that I think the private sector really wants, because you've heard it all. It's the same mantra over and over: cut my taxes, etc. But any business owner, any business leader will tell you that there's a pretty simple model. First of all, you're in business for one reason. And Ali Goldratt spelled this out. The goal of being in business is to make money. The goal in government is different. So I really think our private businesses in America will figure this out. Maybe to pain for some of us, maybe to the benefit of, I hope, most of us. But what you get when you get me up here tonight is also an advocate for the disabled population. And we see a lot of what's happening in the disabled. It's the same with the seniors. So my wish list, and this is directed, I'm not sure if we're gonna get out into the federal zone, but Jane's done a great job locally, expressing that. But federally, and I want to tie this into our minimum wage, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but if you are disabled, or if you are on assistance, there are all these crazy caps on what you can earn and what you can do. So if we raise our minimum wage to $15 an hour, that is going to put some people in serious jeopardy of losing their benefits, unless the federal government and the state government take a look at raising those caps. I am a payee for an individual who his grand total is about $9,000 a year on his disability. He has a part-time job, which our work for welfare program says you got to work 20 hours a week. That individual does have a 20-hour-a-week job, by the way, minimum wage. By formula, actually, Pam helped me years ago. I don't know if you remember this, when we appealed our food stamps for this individual. Minimum wage, $9,000 a year disability. His food stamps were reduced to $10 a month by formula. I can tell you that, thank you, state government, they raised it to $15 a month this month. A cap of about $1,100 a month is all that individual can earn. So we have people out there that are seriously unable to work. They are disabled. They are willing to work, trying to be part of the society. And we have put, strangely, these caps on what they can do without really giving any thought to the individual, because we're looking at some bottom line. I don't know if this is accurate, but I'll say it out here. In the investigation, when we were looking at the food stamp program, they said that program has not really had a serious overhaul since Lyndon Johnson introduced it. We tweak it each year. It's a long way away.
I would not dispute that. So thank you so much, and thank you for adding that personal story of how that struggle can be. So for our panelists here tonight, and thank you for your participation, one quick more round of applause. All right. So again, I hope to see you guys next Thursday, or tomorrow Thursday, and then 2 weeks from Thursday at my kickoff. So looking forward to it.
And a round of applause for Donna for our inauguration. Thank you to all of you, really. Some of the conversations now, there's just so much going on in my head, and so I'm sure there is for everybody else here. one of the things that I would like to be able to take away from this is what we can be doing. And so I hear the funding is a big thing, and for, especially for you guys, you're private. So that means most of the money that you get is either money you're scrounging for from grants, private grants, or money you are scrounging for, begging for from private individuals. So money, money's where it all comes down to. But what else? Volunteering. Trin, I know your Meals on Wheels program.
Yeah, volunteers, you know, none of us can operate at all without our volunteers. At the Senior Center, we utilize about 10,000 volunteer hours a year. So that makes a big difference in what we can do and what services we can provide. But I want to also add just awareness. You know, awareness of what the services and the programs and the resources that we can offer. So if you know someone who, a neighbor, someone at church, someone in your family who might need help, you know, reach out to them and let them know that there are resources and service providers that can help. We find that culturally it's sometimes hard to ask for help. There's a lot of pride, there's a lot of I don't need this help, and so a lot of stuff gets kind of just let go for a long time. So do advocate and increase that awareness, increase your own awareness of what we offer so that you can help your neighbor when time comes.
In terms of the advocacy, there are many, many things, and you all are, it's preaching to the choir in this audience because you're aware of a lot of things and you're already engaged in a lot of things politically. But for a community like Chelsea, just this year, this 2018, we put 2 new citizen commissions in place. One is a housing research commission, the other is a transportation commission. These are municipal advisory groups that are put in place to do the research, to present the options, and to bring a face of awareness and public support to alternative options. So every community has a planning commission, they have a municipal board, trustees, etc. It's important to go and make your voice heard, to let those elected officials know that you're in support of these things. They want to hear about the challenges, they want to hear about the solutions, and you need to be on that. And then keep them accountable. The RTA, I know that there's there's conversation right now about another potential ballot proposal for the Regional Transit Authority. We have no representation on any of the boards from Western Washtenaw County. There is an advisory committee that's looking for council members. If you're interested in that, if anybody is interested in that, go and be our representative. Right now there are 2 people from Washtenaw County that actually sit on the board of RTA, and it's my understanding that the last go round of this, I went to a couple of the campaign meetings, it was way too late. They never heard from us. They sort of discount the fact that we need services because, right, there is a perception that we are an affluent community and also this, you know, sometimes well-earned reputation of being fiercely independent, right? And we can be independent and still want to be part of the transportation system and still want to look at housing options. So be an advocate for those things in your communities.
Thank you. And just one last thing before we move on to our next guest. Sort of along those lines, if you're not making it to your local, your township, your city, whatever, meetings on a regular basis, try, because if they're not hearing from you, they're not caring about what you care about. If you're not making it clear to them what it is that's important to you, then they're going to be working on things that are important to them, or guessing at what's important. So showing up, being a part of that process is extremely important.